excited to learn as well. Mark is a great resource in our community. So I'm going to pass things along, but I'm really glad to see everyone here tonight.
Barbara, I think you're going to talk a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I couldn't be more excited. Mark is one of the great gurus in my world. I have learned so much from him about the bird life on these 80 acres, and I take the same walk because of him. I take the same walk every day of the year on our land to listen and to look and see what changes, because it's only that kind of depth of connection, I believe, that we really start to understand. And I feel as though I'm just beginning to understand. So what I want to just let you all know is that in addition to these workshops, Andrea, Bill, and I have put together a document of resources for you all that have to do with land, habitat, and the wildlife and all the species, but mostly mammals and birds, and the kinds of resources that you might be seeking. We have put this together. Right now it's living on a Google Drive, and we encourage you to add to that, to let us know what your favorite resources are so that we can add them to them. And after these workshops are completed, we will be sending this document out to everyone. And so that we hope that you use it and it serves you well in your work. And also the other piece that I want to just say is that I will be in the chat room tonight. That's my role. And so if you have questions as we go along for Mark or anybody, please do use the chat room for that. And if there's a question that seems that it's coming up right in the middle of everything that's important, I don't have any problem interrupting Mark to ask him that question. He's very kind and will let me do that. So please ask your questions and chat away, and I'll be there to be there to make sure that goes well. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a small group tonight, so it's easy enough for me to answer questions as we go along, and then there'll be, you know, an opportunity for some other questions as well at the end.
Yeah, that's great, and I do expect more people to join us, but we'll see. It's a beautiful spring evening, and people are working in their gardens and such, so maybe it doesn't work in the end for them. Barbara walks down the driveway and listens to the bird, and it helps me learn to listen to the birds and what songs they are. And I'm also the guy who Mark has guided to bush hog and manage the land. And so Mark has been instrumental, and we're really looking forward to those of you who are coming to our property on Saturday for the workshop to talk more about the birds as they're migrating and the habitat that they're looking for, and our little attempt to make our 80 acres more inviting and more nutritious, more helpful for the birds. And so it's my wonderful task to introduce Mark. Most, maybe all of you have met or heard Mark speak. He's the conservation program manager at the Vermont Audubon. He's been with them for more than 15 years, is responsible for a variety of birds and tasks, and has traveled in many places of the world following and learning and then teaching about the birds. So I think the best introduction for Mark is to let him go and do his thing, because you all will see how much he knows. And we're just really pleased to have Mark with us. We had, as Barbara mentioned, we had Tina Scharf talking mostly about mammals, and now we've got Mark talking mostly about birds. And so Mark, I'm going to give it to you and take it away.
Well, great. Thanks, Bill and Barbara, and everybody from the Master Naturalist program for inviting me. It's always a great opportunity, especially with the topic that we're kind of going on, which is this connectivity piece. And I know Tina touched on that, with mammals and things like that. So tonight I'm going to take it from a bird's perspective, and I'm going to share my screen and hopefully bring it right up. There it is. And can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Are we good?
We're good.
So, this connectivity piece, I'm going to be looking at it in a number of different ways. And the vehicle that I'm going to use for doing that is birds, but in particular, a bird called the golden-winged warbler and its close cousin, I guess, the blue-winged warbler. And because not only is there a connectivity here in the Champlain Valley between a number of different properties and how these birds use them, there's a connectivity with the fields, the old fields that they nest in, the shrublands that they nest in, and the adjacent woodlands, which are very important to their presence on the landscape. And then there's the larger connectivity as these birds go from their summer homes here to their winter homes down further south. And so we're going to try to tie that all together. The unique thing about golden wings, because they use a diverse amount of habitats, working to protect and enhance those habitats obviously benefit a whole suite of other species that use, whether it be forests or whether it be the fields or anything like this. And then right at the end, I'll touch a little bit on some of the grassland species that we might encounter. We often encounter in the Champlain Valley, but we hopefully will encounter at Bill and Barbara's property on Saturday. So when we look at the Champlain Valley from a bird perspective, we're part of what's called a Bird Conservation Region 13. And you can see the Champlain Valley and a lot of the St. Lawrence Valley and Northern New York are included in this. And this is a way that bird conservationists kind of look and prioritize bird species. Here in the Champlain Valley, two of those priority habitats are these shrubby areas that are coming up as the land transitions from a period of agriculture to lands that are still in agriculture and are used, for haying and for various crops. And, the kind of leader species for that would be the golden-winged warbler and the bobolink, which uses the grasslands. So, a little bit different from the rest of Vermont, which is primarily forested. The Champlain Valley has, a number of diverse habitats that you wouldn't find in other parts of the state. And from a bird perspective, we look at these priority species, and these are on a number of different lists, whether it be the species of greatest conservation concern or even on this BCR 13 list. And, the birds we're looking at are eastern towhees and field sparrows, prairie warblers, and woodcock. And Barbara and Bill, you'll probably, that's a picture from your deck with the bobcat there. Many species like bobcat also associate with these habitats because there's a food source there. And so although they may be connected more with the woods, they will venture out to eat. And of course, because we've got these open fields and open spaces and shrublands, there's a host of pollinator species which also take advantage of these habitat types. So the golden-winged warbler. So this is a bird that originally, there weren't that many. It's currently being petitioned for federal endangered species protection. And there's a lot of funding that's flowing in to protect the habitat for the species. And Barbara and Bill's property is in a prime example of that mixture of forest, of shrubland, of field, all the components that make the Champlain Valley so important to this bird and a number of other birds. It has a close relative, the blue-winged warbler. And these two are interesting because Cornell found that they're 99.97% genetically the same. So here in Vermont, they sing the same song, they breed with each other. You really don't know what you're hearing or seeing until you see it. And there's many people that think that these indeed may be a single species and just different phenotypes of the same species. But currently they're two different species, and they're both on the species of greatest conservation need in here, Vermont, primarily because the habitat that you have here, this shrubby habitat, is in decline, whether it's through forestation or development pressures. So we work at Audubon here to try to protect those. And the habitats that we're looking at really is this shrubby habitat. And on the left, we first started working with this and talking about connectivity. It's kind of an odd thing, but the Velco power line that runs from West Rutland all the way up to Williston actually is a string of shrubby habitat where we first started finding and looking for these golden-winged warblers. So even though it's a man-made structure, it is maintained, and it does connect all of the towns up through Middlebury, Weybridge, into Charlotte, Shelburne, and we find many of the species that I mentioned along these corridors. And again, from a pollinator perspective, you can see on that picture on the right, we've got a host of, oh, I got somebody that just came in. Hopefully I'm getting everybody in here. And, you know, so there's the opportunities for pollinators with a lot of the natives like dogwoods and viburnums and goldenrods. Unfortunately, there's a whole host of other things that pollinators like honeysuckle and buckthorn and poison parsnip. But those invasives do provide us an opportunity sometimes. So this is where I kind of step back and take a look at the Champlain Valley, and again, look at this connectivity aspect. And what we're seeing in the valley is a diverse amount of habitat, from backyards that are less than an acre to properties that are 10 to 20 acres to areas that are, you know, 80 plus like Bill and Barbara's, to hundreds of acres like Monument Farms, which is just adjacent to their property. And these parcels are all connected and can all contribute to enhancing habitat for these priority species, whether it be mammals, insects, or golden-winged and blue-winged warblers. And you can see here when you look at the map, this is a GIS model that was created for us by a fellow by the name of Stephen Lamont for his master project. And you can see, and hopefully, okay, you can't see my cursor, but you'll see up in the Shelburne Charlotte area, this is a big, huge blob of red. And this is GIS modeling that was done to identify good blue-winged and golden-winged habitat. You see another blob right down in the Middlebury Weybridge area. And then as you go further south, you see, you know, down towards West Haven, Cornwall's in with this, all of the places that have an association of these shrublands adjacent to forested areas. You don't see any of these red blobs once you get east of 116. 116 is kind of the imaginary line that separates these things. So we are the largest easternmost population of golden-winged warblers across its range. So when we zoom in a little bit closer and we come down and we start looking at Weybridge and Middlebury, Cornwall's to the south. Now, GIS modeling is great, but it has its limitations. And when Stephen was doing this, he was weighing properties based on the size of the property and the amount of habitat that was there. So we know that there are birds outside of this habitat. They just weren't picked up with this this modeling and the approach that Stephen used. So you can see Middlebury right there in the center. As you go up Route 23, you can see that cluster of properties there. That's the Collins property. Wright Park is right there just to the left of Route 7. And I noticed that Mary Dodge was on, and Mary, not to leave you out, or the Ropers, and Roper, Barbara, Bill and Barbara, but there are properties that are not picked up on this map that do host golden-winged and blue-winged warblers. Now, as we step down the map just a little bit more, you can see we have the Monument Farms property, the Collins Managed Conservation Management Area, Wright Park, and that little pin right there is Bill and Barbara's property. So one of the reasons that it probably wasn't picked up on this was because that the size of the property wasn't enough to be captured by this model. But again, we know that these birds are using these sites, and they continue to be really important elements to this. So when somebody calls me and asks me if they might have golden-winged warblers, I can use this map as to get an idea of whether there are birds present in the area and the likelihood that the birds may be on their properties. Now we zoom in a little bit closer, and I digitized this earlier today, Bill and Barbara, so hopefully I got the property boundaries right, but it's a rough estimation of Bill and Barbara's property right where the pin is, and it's outlined in yellow. And just adjacent to that, you can see the big Collins farm, which is now managed by Monument Farms. And but you can see the diversity of habitat on Bill and Barbara's property. You can see those open fields, the shrubby areas, the more managed hay fields to the north there. And really important, the forested habitat that we see just to the north of their home and that extends further out. But what's really interesting too is around this whole parcel here, you can see lots of houses and smaller parcels that contribute to this larger piece. And so, again, this connectivity with people's backyards, we have property boundaries, but the birds don't necessarily, well, they don't recognize those property boundaries. So the birds that are using, Barbara and Bill's property could be also using the, folks' backyard. And even small management or habitat improvements that people can do on a small scale can be really relevant to how these birds take advantage of this during the breeding season. So now I'm going to step back a little bit more and talk a little bit about connectivity on a larger scale with birds. Now, things like bobcats and mammals, they don't fly. So they stick around through the winter and their connectivity can be somewhat localized. But as we know with birds, that connectivity can be much more expanded. And so in 2016 and 17, we did a project with golden-winged warblers where we attached these little geolocators to the backs of the birds to see where they wintered. Now, what's interesting about birds is, especially these small little migrants, we think of them as our birds, but they actually spend as much time, if not more time, down on their wintering grounds. So they really could be tropical birds that are just coming north in order to take advantage of our insects and our space. So, when we start thinking about these birds, we not only want to enhance habitat on their breeding range, but we want to also figure out where they're wintering so that we can do what we call full life cycle conservation. So that bird, we were lucky, we put the geolocator on the Collins property, just adjacent to Bill and Barbara's. We were able to catch it again the next year and take off its little backpack and download that data. And what we found, this is a picture. So the way we caught the bird was we enlisted the help of folks from Otter Creek, Audubon, and folks in the area may know Gary Starr there. he does a lot of carvings for Christmas tree ornaments in general. So I asked him once, I said, they're only half a bird. And we chuckled, and 3 days later, I got a full bird in the mail. And this bird is what we used to entice the golden winged warbler with the backpack into the net. So it's our little decoy that we, this bird thought it was another golden wing on its territory. And so we were able to capture it and figured out where it went in the winter. And what we found was, with most of our golden winged warblers, they spend their time in Central America, and some of them actually spend their time in Colombia and Venezuela as well. And so these geolocators give us an idea of the habitats that we also need to protect. Now, you go down to Central America, and where these birds hang out is the habitat's not dissimilar to Vermont. Lots of small fincas, small farms that are connected together with various different habitat structures that these birds use. So there's lots of efforts going on down in Central America and Northern South America to help these birds here. I might be able to later on, if we have a little time, I couldn't get it to run, but there is a GIF model that runs with this where you can actually see the migration route that these birds take with these little backpacks. So when we talk about this connectivity and how landowners can work together to, basically manage their properties or maintain their properties for these habitats, we do it on a number of different scales. Some of them are large, where we're using machinery to come in and remove invasive species and select for the native viburnums and dogwoods, so that we can keep the invasives out. And by removing the invasives, we create these gaps that the winged warblers like. These are a couple of images of work that we did down at the Buckner Preserve, down in West Haven. And the upper corner there is actually over at Wright Park, right here in Middlebury, where we worked with not only the Middlebury Area Land Trust, but also with the Hannaford Career Center. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming slide. The other way that we're approaching enhancement now, we've always been kind of in the removal business, removing invasive species, managing the habitat that way. But now we're beginning to take a look at managing some of these fields before they become overwhelmed with invasive plants. And so we're starting to do plantings with a number of different organizations. And this is something that landowners can do, whether it's on 5 acres or whether it's on 20 acres, planting bird-friendly plants. And you can go to the Audubon website and actually look that up, type in your zip code, and it'll give you a list of plants that are available. And I'm sure Barbara's resource list has a number of those as well. And we're starting to go into fields which are no longer being hayed and getting a head start by getting those native shrubs and trees in place, so that the invasives don't kind of get out competed right from the start. So this has been, we're working on Lewis Creek on a number of different sites. I don't know if folks are familiar with the habitat stamp program at the state. This is a program where you can donate money and it goes into a big pool, and Audubon's been fortunate that we've been the recipient. We use money from another grant to cover my time, and then that habitat stamp money goes directly to purchasing plants and doing invasive species control. So I highly recommend folks going to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department webpage and getting themselves a habitat stamp. There's a new stamp every year. So that's been a great, advantage to working on a lot of the wildlife management areas and other locations. So one site that I wanted to highlight, just because it's a unique partnership that we have, is Wright Park, where we're working with MALT and the Hannaford Career Center. So students at the Hannaford Career Center, as part of their forestry and wildlife program, are coming over to Wright Park, and they're actually practicing their chainsaw skills, and they're removing invasives. They're doing some GPS and some various different mapping on this property. And they're basically reclaiming some of the areas which, when this was originally purchased and the management plan was put together, have slowly grown in. So these are areas that had already been selected as sites that could be used and maintained for shrublands. So it's a great place to go, and a great learning opportunity for the students. I get to go down and band birds and show them the stuff that what we're doing and make that connection for them. Now, another site that is important, and I've already mentioned it, which is just adjacent to Bill and Barbara's property, is the Bob Collins Conservation Farm. And this is a property that is conserved with the Middlebury Area Land Trust and the Vermont Land Trust, and has both grasslands, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as these shrubby areas. The Jameses, who run Monument Farms, are like to hunt, and hunting and white-tailed deer and turkey, all of that, those game species overlap in these shrubby areas as well. So when I'm out with a landowner like Bill and Barbara, I might be talking golden-winged warblers. When I'm out with the Jameses, I might be talking turkey and deer. So going back to that connectivity piece and bringing everybody on board, there's different hats that you wear as you work with landowners to try to bring these connections together. And then, the last piece with this is just what Bill and Barbara are doing on their own land by managing it themselves. A lot of landowners undertake that work themselves. There are some financial opportunities out there through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service that do provide some funding. But a lot of people just have the, they'd like their land and they want to maintain it and manage it and keep it in a place where it benefits this whole suite of shrubland species. And, another property which is close by to here, talking about connectivity, is the Herd Grasslands, which has just recently been protected through an easement with MALT and with Otter Creek Audubon. So that's another site that has that combination of grasslands and shrublands, and it is important, at least in the past, hopefully this year as well, for the next suite of species that we're going to kind of discuss. And that is our grasslands. So oftentimes when we go out to a site where we find these shrubby areas, we also find these open areas that many grassland bird species use. And the management that is needed here is quite a bit different from what we see with things like golden-winged warblers and blue-winged warblers. This is a system that is human created and is managed and maintained by humans, and the birds take advantage of it. And of course, there are specific challenges with maintaining this habitat and keeping the farmers happy as well. So the species that we focus on with these are the bobolink, the R2D2 bird. And this was a great thing at Bill and Barbara's property. They protected a hayfield just north of their property and did some management there. We'll talk about that on the walk on Saturday. And for a couple of years, they waited patiently for the bobolinks to come back and maybe take advantage of that field with the new management and mowing tactics. And sure enough, was it last year that I was down there that we walked out, or was that 2 years ago?
It was 2 years ago that I was bemoaning that after 5 years of management, nothing had happened, that we were walking out there with you, and sure enough, there they were. And they came back again last summer, and I'm hoping they're going to be there for this Saturday.
Yep. So they seem to be coming in a little late. That's what I've been hearing from folks. So that's great. Again, that's another way that folks, landowners can work to protect the grasslands by alternating some of the mowing schedules. There's a program called the Bobolink Project, which tries to focus on compensating landowners and farmers for doing some delayed mowing and alternative cutting schedules. Sorry, sorry, Mary. Hopefully I didn't leave you out too long. I'm talking and her name popped up on the screen. So we'll continue on. The next species is the eastern meadowlark. Now, this unfortunately is a pretty beleaguered species. It just got added to the Vermont threatened species list. And so its population has declined 80 to 90% across Vermont. And yet that area that runs from Weybridge down past through the Collins property and then onto the Herd grasslands has been an area where meadowlarks have been found on a pretty regular basis. So there's an effort now out by the Vermont Center for Eco Studies to locate these properties. And then again, work with landowners to provide that connectivity, these habitat types that these birds need in order to survive. And meadowlarks, there aren't that many of them left. This was probably for farmers that were out in their fields 50, 60 years ago, haying after 4th of July. These were probably birds that they heard all the time with the bobolinks out in the field. And their requirements are a little bit different, and they seem to have suffered a little bit from some of the mowing strategies which have cropped up over the years. And the big threat to these species is that mowing and haying has intensified. And so, as farmers start to cut earlier to get more nutrition out of their hay, they're cutting in June, and that's the prime time for a lot of these grassland birds. So again, the management actions that we use for this are a little bit different in that we're looking to, again, delay mowing, or folks up at UVM have also worked, Al Strong and Noah Perlett, that you can actually, if you can get a cut in May and then wait 60 days, that you can allow bobolinks to breed as well. But with the situation with Bill and Barbara's property, not only can that parcel there be a primary breeding habitat for bobolinks, but it can also be what we call a sanctuary property. So when birds that potentially get kicked off because of early haying, they have another field that they can go to and try to re-nest later in the season. So those properties are not only important when they're managed that way for the primary birds, grassland birds that are using that, but also for birds that may look at it as a secondary nesting area. And with that, up in the upper corner, that's a golden-winged warbler nest. They nest right on the ground, down in all those shrubs. The females will often attach the nest to a single stalk of dogwood or something, and they use it kind of like a fire pole where they sneak in and then they slide down the pole down to the nest. So again, those shrubby and edge areas are really important. And as far as, you know, partners and resources, I think Barbara's research, I don't know what your resource document has that she's put together, is certainly a much greater resource than what I have here. But as far as landowners reaching out and making that connection, you know, Audubon chapters and University of Vermont, Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, the Natural Resources Conservation Service is a great funding source if you can jump through all the hoops of the federal government. We work, I was just on site with Katie Kane from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners for Wildlife program on sites, for instance, at the CVU Champlain Valley Union campus. We're doing golden wing warbler work there. Velco is a great one, just that connectivity. You know, you wouldn't, you know, it's always great to bring industry into the conservation situation. And because they have that connectivity with their right-of-ways, it's a real important piece that links all of these different communities. And of course, there's the land trust and conservation commissions and a lot of watershed groups that are out there now. There's a big effort to do, you know, plantings and things along those lines. So a lot of resources. Take advantage of what Barbara has, stuff that you can do on your own, simply planting, you know, natives like viburnums and dogwoods and a host of other wildflowers. All of these things are great flowering plants for pollinators. They produce an abundance of food in the fall for migrants, as well as provide nesting habitat. But if you are looking for advice, you can reach out to us here at Audubon, Vermont. And then the resources at the Fish and Wildlife Department and the Partners Program and NRCS are also invaluable. There was a lot of work done on the Collins property with Natural Resource Conservation Service funding, and we're potentially going to do some work out there again using that funding source. The source that they use is called EQUIP, which is Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And of course, land trusts and conservation commissions on a community scale to make that connections and enhance that connectivity are always key. And so with that,
Mark, that's good. We have questions. We have questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Hit me with them.
Okay. So first of all, you've partially answered it because since everyone has heard that you've come onto our land and helped us assess our land for the viability of working towards habitat, restoration or enhancement. Do people just who are here tonight, should they be reaching out to you? Should they be reaching out to their more local Audubon chapters? To what's the best way for them to reach out?
So they certainly can reach out to me, and I probably should have my contact information up here, but it's also on the email. The Otter Creek Audubon chapter is a great resource as well. They do some wonderful work. Middlebury Area Land Trust down where you are, they've been a great partner. So there's a lot of different resources out there. County foresters, Chris Olson, I think, is your county forester there. Folks like Tina Scharf. But certainly they can give me a ring, and if it's not something that I can potentially take on, I can get them in the right direction to make those contacts.
That's great. Great. Thank you. So the second question that has come in is specifically when you were talking about the meadowlarks.
Yes.
And Andrea Landsberg asked, where are meadowlarks really native to, and are they in still good numbers there? Because I believe before Europeans came, this was not habitat for meadow birds, being mostly forested, not against supporting these birds, but are we artificially recreating a man-made habitat?
So
Really
this is a good question, and it's a question that comes up about grassland birds a lot, both bobolinks and meadowlarks and some of the other ones. It is very true that we were a forested landscape before the Europeans arrived. There were probably some of these birds. But for instance, that bird conservation region that I showed you is also home to 12% of the bobolink population in the world. And so what happened is, as the east was cleared and these birds moved in, it became a sanctuary for them, as many of the prairies out west got converted into heavy duty agriculture. So it is a question that you can kind of go back and forth with. I tend to think that, we have the habitat here, and if we can manage for these birds and provide that habitat, that we should do that. Meadowlarks are declining across their range. So it's not just here in Vermont, but throughout the Northeast. And I'm not sure about the Midwest, but if you look at all those fields of corn out there, all of that native prairie grass isn't what it used to be way back when. So if we can manage for them and we can keep them around, I'm all for it.
Great. Okay, more questions are coming in.
Okay.
So Marguerite is asking about explaining the idea of creating a strip that is unmowed between the woods and field.
Yeah, so that's often a great way to approach that. And we call it what's called a soft edge. So that back when I was at UVM, I think they called it an ecotone. I don't know if that term is being used. And what you can do there is you let Ma Nature take its course. But what you want to have happen there is to allow the natives to really dominate, the native shrubs and things like that, and work really hard to keep the invasives from getting established, primarily honeysuckle, buckthorn, and multiflora rose. So if you have the opportunity to create that strip and can get ahead of the invasives by pulling them, you can do that. You can also plant dogwoods and viburnums. The Intervale Conservation Nursery sells them up in Burlington. You can get bare root stock or potted stock, and you can try to get ahead of the game with that too.
Great. Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, how about more? There's a question about habitat connectivity in different kinds of areas, but there's also a question about golden wing warblers specifically, about their clutch size, their nesting, their call, and other habits of the golden and blue wing warblers. Mary Dodge was hoping you would share a little more about those birds specifically. So before we talk about up in Lincoln, let's talk about
so I could do a whole nother PowerPoint just on that, because they are an interesting species. They do nest on the ground. I'll try to go through it, Mary, as quick as I can here. They do nest on the ground. They do something called patch switching, where the males will hang out during the day around their territory. Then they go looking for extra pair copulations. A female's nest can have upwards of 40% of another bird's genes in it. And then the males go up to the forested habitat and spend the rest of the day up there and start that whole cycle all over again. Another interesting factor about the golden wings and blue wings is the males will bring the male fledglings into the woods, and the female keeps the female fledglings in the shrublands. So again, that connectivity and those two aspects of having the woods adjacent to the shrubland is important. And that's why you didn't see any really big red blobs out in the farmlands of Addison County, because they might have the shrublands, but they don't necessarily have the associated forest habitat. So that's a quick...
really good reason for everybody to come on Saturday, because they will see this very habitat. And as I was saying at the very beginning, there are a lot of these warblers around right now. So and
hopefully we'll catch one. Their song is, it's really lyrical. the golden wing goes bzz, 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 and the blue wing goes bzz, bzz. I'm being very sarcastic there. They do have another rattle song that goes on, but they're not the most, when they're there.
Great. Now, linked to this last answer, what kind of acreage of shrubland and forested area are we talking about for the warblers? Is there a specific number of acres or?
It's interesting because these birds can take advantage of small little areas, maybe an acre or two of shrubland that's adjacent to a forest. And they'll use that as much as they will, an extensive shrubland. So in the Middlebury area where you have a lot of these birds, you will find them in small patches and big patches. So this goes back to that landowner that might only have 2 or 3 acres, but if they're adjacent to more shrubland or have the forested habitat, they're contributing to that, to the needs that bird has.
That's great. So what about places like Lincoln that are more forested? Can you speak to the habitat connectivity in those areas?
So that's a different beast, because as far as some of the stuff that we're talking here, we're talking about these patches of mixed vegetation and forest and field. Once you get up into the hills, what we really try to do at Audubon, Steve Hagenbu is the head of our forest bird initiative, is to keep those forest blocks as intact as we can. The larger the forest block, the better it is for those forest birds. Now, that said, some management within those forests can be very beneficial. So if you do a harvest in a forest and you create more internal structure, so understory, mid-story, and then your canopy, you're going to then support a whole host more birds than you would have if you were missing those lower pieces. So proper silviculture can be a very effective tool for forest birds.
Interesting.
It's great to not cut anything, and that can be beneficial too. But a lot of Vermont's forests used to be ag land. They're 70 years old, and they oftentimes can be look very much the same. And so by breaking that up, by dropping a couple trees or harvesting if it's done correctly, Foresters for the Birds is a program that Audubon has, which works with foresters so that they develop management plans that are beneficial for birds. So that would be the approach that I would take up in the Lincoln area.
Well, here's a different question from Bill about visual tools to look at property from the air and understand the relationship to the other properties around them, because sometimes you just don't know,
Right.
Where is this? Should folks use Vermont Atlas? Do you have recommendations where they go to take a look at these things themselves?
So the Vermont, so that, or the BioFinder is another tool that folks can use. Oftentimes for some of the shrubland components, it's a difficult thing for those maps to do. So that was why Audubon developed this GIS map. We don't have it out for public access, although we're thinking about doing that. Another place to go if you're looking to see whether the habitat is good is to go to eBird. And if you put in golden winged warbler and you see a cluster of little balloons in certain areas, then that habitat's going to be appropriate for that species. So that's a great tool. And the other technological tool which is out there now, which everybody seems to be talking about, is Merlin, which is the bird sound song app. And that's a great way to identify birds and bird song, especially for these small warblers now that all the leaves have come out and it's really difficult to see them.
Great. I know I've been using it.
Yep.
So we have one last question, which Natalia is asking. She was trying to post a blue-winged warbler photo from last year from her woods that she was pretty sure there's a breeding pair back there and hoping they return. But her question is, how meaningful and impactful is the information collected by owners of smaller properties?
It's really important. And again, the tool for doing that is eBird, because it allows somebody like myself, when a landowner calls in, I can pull up this GIS map, but as I talked about, not every property is identified on that. But if I go to eBird and I see that there are birds in that area, just like I mentioned, that is a contribution that is really important to us. Again, identifying these clusters, these areas, these landowners that are adjacent to each other, and trying to work with those landowners to manage for the birds. So yeah, all those individual sightings are really important.
Great. Okay, there's the eBird website. So I think that's it for the questions. If anybody has one last question to ask, otherwise we're really totally on time here.
What?
Mark or Bill or Andrea, do you have last comments? This was so good. We really hope everybody comes on Saturday, because seeing this and hearing about it online is so different from being in the place.
Yeah.
Because then you get to see, well, what do these woods mean? What does shrubby land look like actually? What does it feel like to walk around this? And right now, there are at least 4 places on my walk every day where I'm hearing these warblers.
Yep.
And they're all these kinds of shrubby places Mark has described tonight. So come and see what they look like in person.
And, you know, the forest there up near the house has the host of forest birds. You have field sparrows there as well, potentially towhees, thrashers.
All of them.
And this is just, and because it's, you know, we're at the height of the migration right now, one never knows what northern species might be passing through. These early successional shrubland habitats are really important for birds during migration, both in the spring and in the fall. And just to throw one last pitch in, we're starting to find, I was talking about that patch switching. Many of the forest birds, or wood thrushes and veeries, will bring their young out into these shrubland patches because there's a lot of food and there's a lot of cover for their young. So even these forest birds are taking advantage of this early successional young forest shrubland habitat prior to their departure to head south.
Yeah, well, we have the wood thrushes every morning and and every evening, and they're my heart bird because they're the most beautiful song. So yes, we have all of those right now. We have lots and lots of great birds for you all to come see. So thank you, Mark. Bill, do you want to wrap it up?
All I would add is that if anybody on this Zoom was not able to sign up for our workshop this Saturday, there is another one on June 4th that Malt and Otter Creek Audubon are hosting on Gale Herd, the grasslands, which is another opportunity to view a mixed landscape as well, and really experience the thrill of seeing these birds up close. Yeah. And Andrea, how about you and out in the you've got your lands closer to the lake and lots of
I think, I'm sorry, I've had a little bit of unstable internet, so I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, it's been really exciting. I'm a very amateur birder, but I have learned so much in the past couple years. And actually, we are unique in Shoreham. I feel like there's not a whole lot of forested land out here, but we do have a pretty big patch and a lot of forest adjacent to fields and then orchards. So a huge diversity on our land. So I've been learning my learning curve for warblers is amazing right now. There's so much, and it's so exciting and overwhelming, and love it. I'm out every day hearing new things and noticing a lot of the same things. I would just say I was so excited last year. I have a bike ride I do just down the road from us where there's meadow larks, and they're back this year. We had
Okay.
bobolinks in one of our hay fields close to our house and orchard last year. I hear also wood thrush. I was hearing Tennessee warblers today.
Mhm.
So I don't think I've heard the golden winged and blue winged, but I'm kind of keeping an eye on a couple areas that have a little bit more of the rough shrub scrub edges and kind of listening in those areas. So I'm really excited to come Saturday. I'll probably be bringing my 8-year-old daughter with
Oh,
me,
excellent.
who is she's really loving learning with me.
Well, keep an eye on those flowering apples. The Tennessee warblers love the trees that are blooming right now.
Yeah.
And they just came in like 2 or 3 days ago. Everybody's been telling me. Have you seen
Okay.
in Tennessee?
Okay.
So
That's exciting. They actually were at the edge of the woods close to a part of the orchard that's still flowering. Bloom with that heat, bloom happened so fast, and we're at petal fall right now. So I'm actually really interested also to know the impact of just birds on the spongy moth caterpillars that have hatched already, that are, I can see them through binoculars eating a huge amount of something. I'm hoping it's caterpillars that are, I went for a swim out at Lake Sunset in Benson this past weekend and week, and there was huge amounts of caterpillars in the water. So I know there's a lot of food out there for them.
So the big ones for them is another shrubland bird, which are the yellow-billed and black-billed cuckoos.
Oh,
You're
okay.
apt to see or hear more of those because they like spongy moth caterpillars.
Yeah, yeah.
And golden wing and blue winged warblers, the genus name is vermivora, which means worm eater.
Okay.
So they won't go after the big spongy moth caterpillars, but they do eat a lot of the small caterpillars that you would find out and about.
Okay. Very cool.
So, all right,
Thank
we're
you,
looking forward
Mark.
to seeing you and your daughter, and I'll be there first thing, and hopefully, come around 7:30, 8 o'clock. I'll have already caught some birds, and we'll take a look at what I caught, and then we'll just go wandering the properties and see what else we can find.
Great.
Great.
Really
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much, Mark. And thanks everybody for joining
Thank you,
us
everyone.
tonight, and look forward to seeing many
So-
of you on Saturday.
One question, Bill, I did record this, but when I recorded it to the cloud.
Yeah,
As-
either
as
you or I
opposed to-
will get an email later making it available.
Okay, I didn't want to know if I should do it on my computer, but hopefully there were some folks that came in a little bit later, and I hope I got them in enough time. But sometimes my mom used to tell me I couldn't tie my shoes and talk at the same time. So hopefully if folks got in late, they can see it at a little later date.
Yeah, we'll make it available.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your evening.
See y'all.
Bye-bye.